I've started to write a book called The Future of Social Media, and my first guest in this new series is John Root, who has by far one of the most impressive resumes I've seen in this field. He was the motion capture lead at Magic Leap, the motion capture animation supervisor at Digital Domain, the co-founder of VRLA, the motion capture supervisor at Industrial Light and Magic, and finally, the most recently, the show programming principal in charge at Disney on Star Wars Mandalorian 2, Chapter 2, The Child. Is that correct?
So there was a bit of it got a little foggy there at the end. So I was the motion capture supervisor on The Mandalorian Season 2. And so I was the guy that was, tracking the camera and providing a frustrum. So, if you're familiar with how it was done, it was more or less a holodeck and inside of a giant cylinder of LEDs, which we were drawing, what you would have seen if you were really in that environment. And so we know where the camera is, and we can put on that wall what the camera should be seeing. So in order to do that, you have to motion capture the camera. Yeah. And then once I was done with that, then I went to Imagineering. And Disney Imagineering is where we, these are the people that, come up with the theme park rides, all the shows and clever little cool technology. We call them dark rides usually at Disneyland. And if you know the timeline of when The Mandalorian 2 finished shooting, it was basically right when we were heading into the pandemic. So I was at I'm proud to say that I was an Imagineer, but only for 2 months. The world came to an end, COVID hit, and Disney had to shut down all the parks and furlough something like 90%, I don't know the actual number, but like 9 out of 10 Imagineers all got furloughed, myself included. And not being the kind of guy that can sit around the house and do nothing, I took a job as virtual production supervisor for Disney feature films. So right now I'm working on a movie. I don't know if I can say what it is, but we'll just say it's an A-list director. It's a animated feature film. If you look at Disney's last couple of years, they've been sort of going back through their back catalog and doing the live action treatment on their classics. And so I'm doing one of those. It's like Lion King. Was it live action? No, it was entirely animated, but it looked like live action. So We're doing one of those, and the whole thing's a virtual production. So that's where I'm now.
I saw the holodeck screens last year at CES, and they Sony had this giant booth, and then they had the Echo One from Ghostbusters sitting in front of it, and then a red camera moving around it, and then you could see what it looked like being in this shot, and it looked as if it was this entire built-out set. It was really impressive, and it was just unreal.
So if you, 10 years ago or whatever, if you try to do that against a blue screen or a green screen, taking something like the Ecto One, all the reflections in the glass and the highlights on the car itself would have been blue or green. And, you can build a bunch of practical set around it, but at some point you can only build so much set before it's blue or green.
Yeah.
And so now imagine you're in post and you're in visual effects land, and you're some poor sucker at ILM or something. You're now having to. So,
right, anyway.
So let's imagine now that you after the shot, after you've shot this Ecto One against a green screen, now in visual effects, you got to go paint out all those green reflections and add in reflections of the city or fantastic environment that should have been reflected there. So by shooting the Ecto One in a virtual stage, or I think we used to call it a holodeck, but that's since it's a ILM thing and Star Trek is not a Disney thing, we don't like to use holodeck. It's stagecraft. So anyway, the benefit to doing this is that all those reflections are accurate. And so when you're looking at shots of the Mandalorian, when I'm looking at shots from the Mandalorian, and Mando is like walking through an environment, all these reflections are moving over his helmet and everything, you're like, why does this look so much better than everything else? That's because it used to be they would have to, there was no rolling reflections. And if there was, it was super limited, and somebody had to go in and put a ton of work into doing that. Now, that's not to say I got to be careful what I say here, of course, because that's all strictly NDA'd and whatnot.
Yeah, and if you do say something and then we review it and then it is something you need me to cut, I will cut it.
The downside is that, used to be after you'd gone and shot everything and gone through the editorial process and cut it down to just what is going to be in the edit, you could then go do your visual effects on the 82 frames where the character is walking at the screen. And I'm not talking about Mando anymore, I'm just talking about in general. And but now that you have to, now if you're going to be doing it in these virtual stages, the entire environment in its 360 glorious self has to be built ahead of time. So usually you wouldn't even care what all that was, it's just blue, and we'll figure it out in post 6 months from now when we're at our visual effects facility. But now, unlike ever before, all these visual effects artists have to be engaged before the shoot. So we took this problem that used to be 81 frames worth of a problem and moved it to, well, we don't know what's going to end up on the screen. It could be anything. So we have to build the entire environment at that final quality level to work from any angle that they might decide to do on the stage. So, it's like all problems, like with great power comes great responsibility, which is like, just because you can doesn't mean you should, which is April, who you just met.
So let me ask you that: do people say we'll fix it and post it anymore?
So it's weird. So I think that I don't know what the real number of in-camera finals is, but I can say that the notion of what even is post is starting to change. So things like color timing, color correction, some like compositing type stuff where it's like, let's just vignette the edges of the screen a little bit to draw focus to, I think that, there's a lot less rendering of shots, there's a lot less of models and textures having to get created and rendered in RenderMan or V-Ray or whatever your renderer of choice is. There's a lot less of that now having to happen afterwards, but it all still had to happen. It just now had to happen in front rather than in the back. But I've seen some virtual productions, and by virtual productions I mean the like LED stage style of virtual production. I've seen some happening now where there's a lot of post that still has to happen, and I've seen some where there's very little post that has to happen. So the virtual production I'm on right now, let me back up a little bit here. I would say that the term virtual production has really morphed. I think that The Mandalorian came along and in some ways stole that term. Virtual production has been around for a long time. If you go back to Avatar, Christmas Carol, even as far back as Final Fantasy and Polar Express, the mocap movies, if you will, it was virtual production, right? You'd shoot your mocap, and then you'd get all that, performance into a real-time game engine, and then you'd lay down virtual camera on it. And the benefit there was that, you've gotten this perfect performance that you got from your actors out on the mocap stage, and now you're going to get as much coverage on that performance as you want. So you're going to lay down as many cameras as you want. And the actors are always going to hit their marks the same way. They're always going to say their lines the same time because you've got it in this virtual can, if you will, that allows you to go do as much coverage as you want. So then now the actors have all gone home, and you've got this small creative crew that's like, say, maybe the director, the DP, the editor, and they're all in the virtual camera volume, and you're holding this Red Rock rig with nowadays it's just a Vive puck or something on top of it. And you're shooting this thing inside of a virtual, Unreal, or we used to use Motion Builder back in the day. Unity is popular too, but every track that you lay down is immediately available in the editor's bin. And so now the editor is starting to cut together these shots, and you're looking at it going like, oh yeah, this is starting to work. But we need an insert here of his hand when he reaches for the cup or something, right? Yeah. And so the director, the DP, is just like, yeah, sure, let me grab that for you, right? And you don't have to set up for a new shot, and your DP has to light it now, and your actors are gonna, oh, he flubbed his line, we're going again on take two. It's just open up the scene, grab some coverage, let's try a different lens. It's all instantly at your fingertips. And so, there's a lot of different ways to describe virtual production, but there's a couple of things that seem to hold true amongst all of them, and that's real-time graphics on set, right? So some of the traditional movie making processes have been replaced with or enhanced with computer graphics. Now, back in the, late 90s, when this was first starting to happen, people on movie sets were just like, so the idea of having there be, a game engine that was doing this was like so foreign. The people who are coming up and walking onto these sets that's totally intuitive to them, right?
Yeah.
So this whole new breed of filmmaker is starting to emerge. Like there's these people who, like Robert Zemeckis, James Cameron, who embraced it early. Favreau, even Spielberg have led the way and made it acceptable for people to do this. And now we're starting to get past the technology and into the real benefits of it. What I mean by that is, like, used to struggle with uncanny valley and things not looking right and just over visual effects of it all. And now the VFX companies are getting so good and the costs are coming down that people are leaning into it rather than shying away from it. And maybe we're not quite there yet when it comes to digital humans and people that don't exist looking like real believable characters, but
we're starting to get close. We're like at that weird tipping point. We just have to get over that last little hump.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. The Paul Debevec once described it in a way that I really liked. It was that originally the Uncanny Valley was like this, like, robot guy said that, like, robots are creepy. And the meaning that I like better, the interpretation that I like better, was that when two things are very different, you look for and appreciate their similarities. When two things are very similar, you look for and are disgusted by their differences. It's a different way of interpreting it, but if you think about, say, a cartoon like a Bugs Bunny, totally different than a real human, but it's because they're so different that when he does human things, you find it almost endearing or funny or interesting. But then you take a character from a movie that missed that mark of the Uncanny Valley, and it's what we talk about all the time, but it's like, ooh, like I see a thing that's weird, and now I'm just dwelling on it and thinking about it and not paying attention to the story. And so there's this crossover point. So I guess the point that my takeaway is that there's this opposite end of the Uncanny Valley where it works in your favor, which I always thought was interesting and unexplored in a way, or just intuitively known by the cartoonists of the world.
I saw this video where somebody was explaining the Uncanny Valley from a standpoint of evolution.
Mm-hmm.
So back in the day, there were like different versions of humans running around. We just happened to be the group that survived and let off, right? And our ability to tell which ones weren't actually human was like was like in the details. And that's actually where it comes from.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's some weird shit. I don't know if I agree with that, but it would make a great book. Now I'm wondering, though, if it's almost like a genetic, like, people want to procreate and they want to find good mates, and so people that are creepier don't look right, just maybe don't. I don't know. I'm just playing with that notion. I don't know if I can get it to make sense, but it made me think what you said. That's for sure.
Okay. So you've been doing this since like the 90s. What do you think the biggest leap within this like span of 30 years virtual production has actually taken? Like what was like the killer app basically?
So I guess, when I got into making video games in the 90s, one of the first games I ever made was on the NES, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
There's been lots of big leaps. Back then you were drawing sprites in like 4 colors. And then we thought it was amazing when you could have 16 colors. And then when the Nintendo 64 came along, it was like, holy shit, we're doing polygons. And if we could have, I think the texture size back then was like 32 pixels by 32 pixels. Like, it was so rudimentary, but like there's been a number of advancements that have come along. But I would say that the thing that to me made the biggest difference was the democratization of the game engine technology. So that, Unity and Unreal, before that renderware, and these things where you could just buy or download the ability to make a video game. So, when I started making video games, if you couldn't write assembler, you just didn't get to make video games, right? Like, of course, I've always been more on the art side, so that's not totally true for me. But the point is, the bar to entry was like, so huge. Like nowadays, anybody could, and they really should, if they're even remotely interested, you could download Unity or Unreal right now and go watch some videos on YouTube, and within a long weekend have made Pong. And within a week you could have made Flappy Bird. Within a month you could have made Mario. Like it's that in your grasp now. And if you think what it would have taken to make Mario, like say the original Donkey Kong, it wasn't even about moving the sprite around the screen. It was about that you had to first create the hardware and the chips that even let you do that, right? There wasn't even a computer that you could just throw in a box and put it at 7-Eleven back then. You had to invent that first. So it's nowadays the fact that everybody's got a computer, not everybody, but like some of us have computers and laptops that are powerful enough to make Flappy Bird in a weekend. And to me, that's incredible. Like if Flappy Bird came out when Space Invaders came out, you'd have been a billionaire.
So when we talk about the evolution of things, where Unity and Unreal are very accessible now, but when we talk about like the social media space of people like say live streaming from their homes, not everybody's going to have these massive sound stages to run giant screens behind them. What do you think the timeline for the evolution of the technology to get to a point where they can basically stop using green screens when doing these sort of things and start building these giant virtual sets at home?
It's funny. So if you follow the forums for the LED wall style of virtual production, you're right. Not everybody has the wherewithal to even set foot on that stage. And in fact, it's interesting to me, these stages are so in demand, they're so booked that you can't even get time to do anything on them. But so the answer to your question that popped into my head was that people are taking, like in front of me right now, I've got 2 monitors, and they're modestly sized, they're not huge, but that you can actually, the same software that runs those Mandalorian style walls, you can run it on your PC and on your dual monitor. And if you've got a consumer Vive or Oculus, I could right now be holding a Vive Puck or just even the Vive controller and operate my camera, and in my monitor in front of me, be looking into a virtual world. And so what I've seen people do, it's totally cool. They take little Lego action figures and they pose them in front of their monitor and they fly this camera around. So they've taken the entire Mandalorian thing and they've just shrunk it down to fit on their desk and made a little movie out of it. And so it's interesting. Will everybody have a holodeck in their house? Like maybe someday, but there are people who certainly aren't waiting.
Yeah.
they're figuring out how to do it. Like right now, you could get, if you look at the price of a television, like you go to Costco or something right now. Mm-hmm. Like, in fact, I just upgraded my TV and I went to, I think I went to Fry's or something like that. And I had a size that I wanted to get. It's not huge. It's like, I don't know, 40, maybe 50 inches, right? And it was like, $500. And I was like, is there a a better TV? Like, what can I get for $800?
Yeah.
Like you almost can't buy a better TV than this, right? So what I'm getting at here is like, you could for, probably not a lot of money, $1,000 or so, buy a 80-inch television that I bet would fill that frame that I'm looking at right now behind you with your black curtain. And then you could make that whatever background you want, or you could just set it to green, or you could create a frustum that slowly moves around. Whenever you reached out and grabbed your camera and just moved it to a new location, the background behind you would totally change and be dynamic and be like, what the fuck, Gino, where are you at today?
That's totally fair. That's totally fair. I remember like 5 years ago, all these professional content creators were building like the panorama green screen walls in their houses, and then just using After Effects to remove the backgrounds. Yeah. And I can see that same level of like, let's go do it attitude to start bringing this level of virtual production into it with just some giant ass TVs.
Yeah, so if you put one behind you, you probably want one in front of you, like just behind your camera. So I don't know, right about where your camera is, so that all those little reflections on you were interesting. And so if we're slowly moving through a jungle, right, you get these like pools of light that are traveling over you, and then you where do you stop? Right now, okay, in order to get that, I need a TV that's hung above me as well, right? But these things aren't super expensive, and for I don't know, 20 grand, we could probably believe that you were somewhere else entirely.
That's so interesting. Okay, I still feel like that's not an attainable price point unless you have like a studio and you're working on some sort of, backed project. But we're getting there. We're getting there.
The Lego guy in front of his monitor, and you're probably the kind of guy that's like not, I don't know, maybe you get a sponsor or something, and you're going to prove this out for them, and they can take it all back at the end when they want. But like, what if you could, 20 grand influencer virtual production kit, and we'll go figure out what that looks like, and then put it in a box and anybody can buy it.
I may have some calls to make right after this. Hey, want to start a new business? Let's go do this. So you spent a good section of your career basically being a mocap artist, being an actor and everything. How attainable is it being like a digital influencer in the current landscape in your eyes?
I should be somebody who's built their career on motion capture and digital humans and virtual production. You'd think I would be more interested in that stuff.
Yeah.
And yet I just find myself like almost completely uninterested in that stuff. The people who are there to entertain me, like I've been to a Hatsune Miku concert. I don't know if I'd go again.
Are you really? That's awesome.
I've like, what's her name, little Michaela? I just have a hard time carrying what she has to say. And I guess it's like, I just feel like there's probably a team of people behind it that are trying to carefully control it. And like, and then there's this other end of the spectrum where it's like, there's all these apps now where it's like I can, using my iPhone, like talk and see myself as a clown or something, and it's like, there's so much of it now that will let me, I think there's still I don't even know if I can still do it now, but it used to be in Google Hangouts, you could put a funny hat on yourself or something, So, how far away from me just showing up to you in a more idealized version of myself? Like, I remember EverQuest was one of the first games, that EverQuest 2, where you could like talk into your webcam and your character would flap its jaw the same way you did. And it was just like, nobody gave a fuck. Nobody cared. Like, people seem to have their me, we use, and they're like, it just never became anybody's primary, avatar. So there's a dozen or more really solid technologies out there for making you into somebody else for your online presence, and I just don't see anybody caring.
Because I'm in the process of doing this book, I actually had to go out and find people who are doing this at a high level. And I think VR chat really sprung a lot of people doing this VTubing thing. And it got to the point where I was like, all right, how can I make this go a lot faster? And I downloaded Snap Camera, and everybody in my team at Studio Capon, we all have it downloaded on our computers, and we hold meetings where everybody has like filters on them, and it's just part of our.
But it's about that you have the filters on you, right? It's not how you would show up to a meeting. If you were going to pitch Coca-Cola on this LED background, you wouldn't show up as your VR chat avatar. It's not who you are. The fact that you were doing it was because you were doing it.
Yeah, but at the same time, instead of like applying makeup to be on camera, right now I just have a filter on my face to make me look better. Like right now as we're talking. Like I have wrinkles and stuff removed, my teeth are whiter, and it's...
Wait. Can you turn that off? Can I see it?
Yeah. Hold on.
It's different.
Yeah. It's very subtle.
It's different. I'm not sure which one I'm looking at now. Is this? Are we back to?
No. This is on.
Okay.
This is off.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess it's a little better. I don't know. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
I guess, if there's an app that I could get that just gives me +1 charisma, why wouldn't I?
Yeah. Why not? And when I do streaming things, I sometimes stream as a croissant with like eyes and a mouth while I'm like working on like 360 video projects.
Yeah.
Because I think it's funny. Like I'm showing up.
Identify as a croissant.
I found the filter to be really funny, and then I started like using it as a character in a small production that I'm doing with friends as far as like a TV show, Adult Swim style pilot. Yeah. Just called Gluten. And so we're using like these filters of like vegetables, but it's like cutting out our eyes and our mouth, putting it on there, and then it like moves with our faces like it's dancing or walking and stuff.
I'm probably the odd man out here. I find that stuff like I think when Neil Stephenson first envisioned this in the Black Sun and the metaverse, and people were walking around with all these different avatars. Some of them were amazing and really expensive. Some of them were just these default, really low res things. Mm-hmm. I don't think we're far from that. Like, I think that's all possible. The place to go doesn't necessarily exist. Like, I don't think anybody's emerged as the metaverse. If you mentioned VR chat is a good example of going in that direction. And I think that when I'm there, maybe I'm more likely to use an avatar, but also maybe it's a reflection of people, because I feel like I've put a lot of work into trying to be some kind of Mr. Mocap guy, virtual production guy, and I don't want to go into VR chat as a giant banana. I feel like I have things to say as me.
I mean that's very fair. I mean, where were you in your career when YouTube became a thing? So what were you doing in 2005?
2005, I was at id Software, and we were working on Doom and Quake and all that. It was the equivalent back then. I mean, I was certainly because we were doing QuakeCon, and of course I was a mice among men with you got John Carmack and John Romero and these just larger than life people who are huge influencers, and everybody wants to interview them. And so it did exist, this notion, but certainly YouTube, it was almost like we talk about the democratization of video game technology. YouTube certainly lets anybody have a platform to go say what they want to say. I guess it's just about, the challenge must be, how do you get them to notice you amongst billions of videos that are out there? I don't know. I guess just back to the original point, there's already dozens of apps out there that will change your face and do this. And I don't see a lot of people gravitating towards it.
I think a lot of people do use it. It's just so subtle that most people don't realize it's being used. Right?
I didn't realize that what you're showing me was possible, and now I want to see what I look like with +1 charisma.
It's a free app. You just download it. You point your browser camera to pick up the Snap camera, and then you tell your regular camera to input to it, and that's it. It takes 5 minutes to set up. And now whenever I'm talking to my friends' kids and they're trying to be entertained, I'll throw on a cartoon head and we'll have fun. And I don't think it's necessarily like me trying to be somebody else. I think it's just an extra fun thing to do, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It feels like VR to me. Like, it's like, why didn't VR stick? It's like, well, it was a novelty. It was fun to try. I wanted to, like, what else can I do? What else can you do in VR? Is there any other cool apps? No, that was it. It pretty much all looks like this. All right, then I guess I'm done.
Yeah. So, like, what was your first entry point to like VR? What was like the first experience you ever tried?
The first headset I put on was to play Descent. So that would have been 95-ish.
Wow.
Whatever that like, VR1 thing was. And then if you were around back then, especially in the Bay Area where I grew up, there was these VR centers where you could go and play Dactyl Nightmare, and there was some like, I think there was a boxing game or something you could play. Mm-hmm. But you'd go and pay like $5 and get 10 minutes or something in one of those VR pods. Then there was these BattleTech centers that sprung up where you could go play the BattleTech game, and the way that looked like is you like walk into this. It's like in a strip mall, and you walk into this center, and this people come out in these like uniforms, like military uniforms, and they're like, like they come right up to you, and they're like, "Welcome, new recruit," and they like usher you into the back, where you have to like, you're going to join the army, and they sign you up for a bunch of shit, and then you watch some videos, and then you go get into this like box that's like this cockpit. And you're grabbing, I remember you had like two controls. I think it was like one of these, like this monitor that's like this big, because that's how big monitors were back then. When it comes on, and it's like, just the crustiest looking, robot out there that's like, 100 polygons. And like, but they built you up through all this like live action experience, and then dropped you in this pod where you're kind of like, oh, well, that's, Right.
So you got sold. You got sold. You got sold on the experience, and then you got to the actual experience.
And then they try to make sure that when you're on the other side, that like you're having fun. So like you're in there, all your other friends are in other pods, and you're battling it out. So like you're like I'd always dreamed of better graphics, but been disappointed for many years. So anyway, that was like the first time I tried it, and because I was into virtual production, we've always had virtual camera. So, the idea being that you're motion capturing this like block of wood or a practical camera or just a piece of red rock gear with markers on it, whatever it is, it's controlling the camera in the game engine. I was no stranger to being able to, in the physical world, control something and be able to get a different view inside the virtual world. What VR kind of is, right? It's this idea that, Bob Berry and I came up with this together in a night of drinking and eating, which is that like, every time you move your head in virtual reality, you're asking the computer a question, right? It's like, well, what does it look like from this angle? And, as I'm sitting here looking at you, if you were to do like maybe when you toggled your filter, I might have done like, huh. And that motion that you would do with your head is something that humans instinctively do, because what they're trying to do is just change their view on the world and build up a better understanding in their visual cortex of, what the fuck am I looking at, right? And you're doing that. Now, when I'm looking at you here, no matter what I do, I don't get any new information about who I'm seeing or what you're doing, right?
Well,
but if we were in VR and you were sitting across from me in VR, I could, do one of these and suddenly start to understand, like, even the face, what kind of pose you're making on your face, like, what's he doing with his hand over there? Like, I could get more information out of this than I'm able to get in this 2D view. And so, there's something compelling about VR for that reason, but too many other problems, and it's like when I was doing VRLA, there was a time when people were coming to us, like big people, like, NVIDIA, Intel, Microsoft, like all the biggest people were coming to us, calling us, looking for our information on the internet, finding us, sending emails going like, how do we get involved? Hey, we want to sponsor your event. Yeah, we want the biggest booth. Like, where's Intel? Okay, I want twice as much as they have. How do I want to do the keynote. What does that cost, right? And we're like going like, okay, like, how about this much money? And they're like, sure, and we couldn't, fight them up. We couldn't build it big enough. Like every time we'd go like, all right, we need to double the amount of size we have, and then we'd get 3 times as many people that wanted to come to us. And then one day it just stopped, right? Where all the communication was inbound, right? Like people were calling us going like, what do we got to do to come see your show, right?
Yeah.
And then one day it was like, oh, I guess we're going to do another one. So, we'd announce that we're doing another one, and you get this little, little push of people reaching out. Well, let me see your deck, and then you're starting to look at it, and it's like, fuck, we don't have a lot of sponsors signed on yet. What's going on, right?
Yeah.
So then you start calling them. So here I am on the phone with Qualcomm or something. I'm like, yeah, hey, what are you thinking to do this year? Like, we've got some great opportunities that are still unclaimed. Like, you could do the keynote if you want to. And they're like, we're going to take a wait and see this year on VR, right? And so here we are. I'm still 6-8 months out from the next VRLA, starting to talk with all their marketing departments. And these are people who know what their budget is, what their message is a year out, right? And so I'm seeing a year into the future of these companies and where they're allocating money and what their dev is and all that stuff. And by and large, all the big companies were like, yeah, we're scaling back our VR. So that was a big warning sign for me. Now, this was sort of like at the consumer level, right? Meanwhile, enterprise VR was starting to heat up, right? So Favreau's using it, deeply in the making of The Lion King. Spielberg is using it deeply in the making of Ready Player One. But we're talking about a dozen headsets on a $200 million movie, so it wasn't, those numbers don't skin. In fact, that's where VR was before Oculus came along and made it $300. You could have bought, before the CV1 or even the DK2, you could have bought a $200,000 VR thing from Canon, or like there's a few people that made them. They just, they found their way into some labs and stuff. But, so, the mass adoption of VR, I guess I hope it happens, because I know a lot of people that I really care about, and I see a lot of use cases for it. We use it on the movie I'm on right now. How do I do it? Like, I don't want to have to learn Unity. Can't I just get a bunch of cameras and and yeah, you could, but was 360 video as good as a Robo Recall?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
360 video as a whole just sucks. Like, the cameras are never high quality enough.
I thought so, but it kept getting better, and then there was like kind of this volumetric stuff, and then you could what was it, nose on, where it was like 360 video, but you could kind of move your head, and it fuck, what's going on here? This kind of looks cool, and but it still never got there, and I always thought to myself, I know Hollywood well enough to know that through sheer force of will and giant piles of fucking money, if this is how they want to make VR, goddammit, that's how they're going to make VR. I just don't think anybody really won there.
I don't think there's any super clear winners right now, but the AR and VR market is 18.8 billion now, as of 2020, and it had a 20% growth.
I don't know how anybody measures that stuff, but I don't believe it. I think that if you could say that there's been $18 billion worth of VR stuff sold, I'm thinking 17.5 billion of it sitting on shelves right now doing nothing.
That was by Statista in 2019. That was their expectations for the market.
Get really passionate about is esports, and so I know there's a big so that's interesting to me. And I don't know, you might have heard some of the stuff I was talking about with Kent Bai, but I think television is almost it's a dead thing, right? Like appointment viewing television, like, oh my God, I got to get home by 8 o'clock or I'm going to miss my show. For me, when I was 12, it was like, I got to get home by 3 o'clock to watch Robotech. But the bus drops me off at my bus stop at 2:45, and if I ran full speed, I could make it home by 3 o'clock to just miss the fucking opening credits of Robotech. And if I did anything less than that, I wouldn't know what Rick and Minmay were doing.
The struggle is real.
But nowadays, right, it's all on demand, it's all streamed, it's all, DVR'd at worst case scenario. And so nobody feels like they have to be somewhere to watch something at a certain time, except sports. Nobody ever binged watched a season of the NBA, right? And you could probably also say that about news. You probably like to watch news. There's every hour you could watch the news on a different channel, so you don't necessarily feel like you got to be there at a certain time to watch the news. But
I do feel like the news is streamed, and then they just kind of replay the same clips for how many hours, and it's all the same information for half a day.
Let's say news. Let's say maybe sports is like, you kind of got to be there when it happened. News is like somewhere lower than that. But then tonight's episode of Game of Thrones, it's like, I'll watch it tomorrow, right? I'll stream, I'll watch it on whatever your current bingey show is. And so anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that the commercial buys, so if you're, Clorox and you want to sell disinfectant wipes, you want to let people know that yours are the best, you might buy a commercial on a football game. And that would probably be better money spent than somewhere where people can, fast forward through it or, tune it out. Because a sports event, like, oh, fuck, we're back. Like, we don't need, like, if you're not, you kind of got to stay glued to the TV, right? Now, there's only so much NFL, NBA, and even, MLB, and maybe NHL if you want to scrape the bottom. I personally think that any sport whose score can only increment by one is fundamentally flawed. But that's something I learned from somebody else. What I'm trying to say is there's only so much ad time to go around, and not everybody even wants to watch these sports. And I think that esports can step in and beef that out. There's things that sort of fall into that category as well, like these live events that Epic do, these virtual concerts and whatnot, where it's sort of game engine-y, but we'll call it, I think it's called appointment viewing, where if you didn't make an appointment with your television at 8:00, you missed the show, you missed the game, you missed the thing. It's not going to be available to where you could watch a YouTube video of it, but you didn't get to participate in it, and it's old news if you watched it after the fact.
I do feel like even though it's really hard to run commercials in tandem with shows that you can do on live, I do think advertainment is a viable option. You just go to, an influencer or a comedian and they do a sketch around said product. That way you don't know that you're being sold to, but it's so entertaining that you find it fascinating and you're intrigued by it.
Interesting. So taking what we typically think of as a commercial and doing something different with it. So,
yeah. So so there's an outfit called the Harmon Brothers that I really admire. One of their first big viral successes is they had this device called a squatty potty, right? And this company went on Shark Tank to try to raise money for it. They did okay. They kind of plateaued on sales. And then they reached out to the Harmon Brothers for proper advertising for it. And what they basically did was they hired a comedy writer to sell the squatty potty, and they did that by a pooping unicorn and a prince. And the video is so weird that you can't turn it off because it's so intriguing.
What's weird to me is that I am familiar with that product, and I don't consider myself a Howard Stern fan. I don't regularly listen to Howard Stern, but somehow I knew about it by way of Howard Stern.
Huh.
And it might be the last time I ever heard Howard Stern, but how?
I do feel like influencer marketing is a really good way of doing this. So say I have a product, I really want to sell Slim Jims. I might, instead of hiring a commercial crew, I might find a YouTube channel with a large audience and go, hey, I have $25,000. Will you make a video about my product in your comedic style or informational stylings? Make it almost viral worthy, and then I'll push advertising dollars behind it. And because there's already that built-in audience, it's much more effective.
So making a commercial something that you kind of want to enjoy, like a Super Bowl commercial. Why can't they all be that good?
Yeah, that's exactly my point.
Yeah.
Like they always go above and beyond and think out of the box for, like, say, the Super Bowl, but the average commercial that you see playing between shows isn't usually that great. And you tend to get smaller companies who do, like, the local advert, and it's usually made by some college kid. It's just terrible.
Yeah. So anyway, I think I would have thought by now esports would have already blown up and it would be on every channel and every billboard. And it seems not dissimilar from VR, where 5 years ago we were expecting these, hockey stick graphs of the rise of esports, and it hasn't. Certainly every year more and more money is coursing through it, but it hasn't become mainstream like I would have thought. Or maybe I'm not.
So if you look at, like, the world, if you look at, say, like, the world finals for League of Legends, their audience for those final rounds is about on par with the Super Bowl.
Right.
And the Super Bowl took 50 years to get there, but League of Legends took, 8.
Right, and League of Legends is on its way up.
Yeah, it's continuing to grow.
Yeah. I'm actually a Dota player, which is the opposite of. Well, I mean, they're the same game, but
it's Valve and Riot.
Yeah, you can't like both. But yeah, so I mean, the Dota Internationals last year was the biggest prize pool in esports history, and I think it hit, was it $25 million or $28 million? Like, it's insane. Like, this is the amount of money that some 17-year-old kid is going to take home or something. Like, I mean, of course, it's got to get split up a lot of ways, but like that, I remember when Thresh won John Carmack's Ferrari at QuakeCon, and it was like, oh fuck, like this is a big deal. This is a used car.
I think the industry definitely changed, where playing video games is now on par with, like, going to college and trying to get drafted by the NFL. Right?
Right? When is it going to be an Olympic sport?
I mean, give it 10 years. It'll probably be added as an Olympic sport. And then
now you choose, though, which game do you pick? Like, what rule set are we going by? Like, it all evolves so quickly that it would be hard to agree on anything there,
I think you probably just take, like, the 10 most popular multiplayer games or one-to-one games, and you basically, if they have leagues and a well-defined league set, then you make it part of the programming.
You get a gold medal in esports. It's not a gold. It's whatever game that was or something.
Yeah.
Like
so like, say the most popular games are like Call of Duty, Dota, League, Overwatch, and Fortnite. That's 5. There's ample reception behind them. There's people who want to watch them live. And that's going to get the most entertainment dollars put into the Olympics. So those would be the 5 games, say, that you run for an Olympic sport. And maybe every 4 years it changes based on the standards and attention of those games.
Yeah. I mean, you're in Seattle, is that right?
Yeah.
So here in LA, I mean, and they must have them in Seattle, but before the world ended, there was, I think, 3 or 4 esports bars that opened here, where it's a traditional bar, but all the TVs are different games, right? Like it's Overwatch, Twitch channels usually, right? And different, the commentators are sometimes what's on a channel and whatever game they happen to be watching, and it's kind of different, and you go there and they're packed, but they don't turn any of the audio on, and I'm like, dude, it's the international. Like, this is the biggest prize pool in esports history. And the guy's like, oh, yeah, but we just keep the audio off because people can't agree on what they want to watch. Right? Like, you come into a Buffalo Wild Wings or something, and it's like, either the local home team is playing and everybody's watching that, or, the next best thing. But it's like, generally there's one audio channel for the restaurant or the bar, right? And like, why is there this sort of lack of cohesion or loyalty or something? Like, something feels. This was one of the guys who like one of the big sponsors at AMD I was talking about how they feel about esports and why they don't do more in esports. He says there's no loyalty there. Like those people don't, a lot of the sponsors are these like endemic sponsors, like Razer keyboards or something, like, and the non-endemic sponsors, the Toyotas of the world, it's like, there's no loyalty. That kid doesn't care about your car. Like this game's not helping make that car any better, like it's just taking your money, and so there's something disconnected about esports and the money, and that's what's, I think, stopping it from getting bigger. But I can't put my finger on it.
I think it's probably the branding. I mean, if the majority of the people who watch said sport are probably like 14, why would you have a car sponsorship when you have to be 16 to drive?
Right. Maybe.
Yeah. But if you say like have the Mr. Beast burger, which is a huge franchise now, like overnight, I mean,
I'm not familiar with it.
So this is really interesting. My business Topher. Yeah. We were in discussions to do this project for like an influencer campaign thing, right? And he basically went, "Hey, it would be really interesting to basically make a menu for like an influencer and distribute it to all these different like local restaurants in whatever city you have, with like, so it's a patty and whatever, and you call it with a specific title for that influencer, and so they can like download an app. It'd be connected to a local restaurant to that person, and then they could be like, hey, I really enjoy this YouTuber named Mr. Beast. He has a menu of like, for his channel of like food. I want to order food from his channel because I enjoy it." So he then got like a real location, made a huge video about it, and when they put up the sign for it, they basically the line to go to the restaurant was 4 miles long, and the wait time was up to 9 hours.
Okay.
Yeah, like there was so much attention behind it, right? Because he, as like this personality, had brand recognition amongst certain age groups. Now, if your game is within that certain age group, that would be a great pairing.
So there's no more local favorites, right? So like, let's say we're in the esports bar, and here in LA, Counter Logic is one of the teams that just happens to be here. They've got their esports house here, and they have players from all over the world, but their house is here. And Counter Logic, I don't know, maybe they're currently playing Overwatch. Mm-hmm. And, I don't know. Yeah, it still bugs me that like, oh shit, like that's our home team. Like, they're on tonight. Like whoever wins this game will be going to the finals next week. Like, shouldn't we care? Like, don't we want to watch it?
That's really interesting. I know that when watching the playoff, so we have a bar, or had a bar in the area called Afk Tavern. And, nice. And it was much like you said. And they were streaming stuff like that all the time, and they made sure if you were in the bar you could hear it. And okay. Yeah, and so like they would have like full theme nights that if you came dressed up as the characters, you got like a free drink, and there's a lot of like consistency with the event that was going on.
Hey, let me run an idea back.
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to change gears here.
Sure.
So I had a business idea that I think is the dumbest business in the world, but I want to do it anyway. Okay. So Dungeons and Dragons, I don't know if it's still having its renaissance, but at least in the last couple of years, it had a big resurgence, right?
Yeah.
And I thought it would be cool to do a very curated, high-end. Well, here's what happened. About 5 years ago, there was this article I saw on the internet for professional dungeon master, right? Like, guy comes to your house and like takes you through a whole thing, right? And so me and a bunch of friends were drinking one night, and we're like, let's do it. Like, let's go back and relive our childhood and play. None of us want to be dungeon master. Let's hire somebody to take us for a ride. So I punch in, like, I'm going to Google for professional dungeon master. Mm-hmm. And let me just tell you this: you don't want to Google for professional dungeon master, because that's a whole other thing, right? So so I started thinking, like, what if this was like in the back of a gaming store at a mall. We're going to take this room and we're going to turn it into, I'll call it like a seance room, right? Where we're going to make the walls all kind of dungeony. There's going to be these like kind of flamey looking torches, and we're going to have control over the lighting that we can make, from another room. We can make the lightning flash, we can make the table rumble, right? And on the table that like maybe 6 or 8 people are around is this amazing diorama of this whole city, right? Where it's like we start in the tavern, and then, oh, we need you to go into the cellar and get the rats out of the cellar, like a D&D trope, and then like we take the top off to reveal the dungeon under, like, so this, and it's like you're casting spells, and maybe there's like even projectors over top that are lighting up the the floor with cool shit, but like, somebody leads you into this room, and they kind of get you seated. Maybe they take your order. There's a funny menu of Dungeons and Dragons food that you can get, and they tell you your dungeon master will be with you soon. The door opens and it's like hooded figure with a some kind of like box comes in as a greetings. Right?
Yeah,
like, he's in character the whole time and sits down and like gets you started. And so it's like, how much would you pay, or would you pay to like, is it worth $50 a person? And it's like 2 hours.
I think whatever escape rooms are charging is exactly what you should be charging.
Right.
Because it's immersive gameplay is what you're doing, right? Your IRL immersive gameplaying.
And you need to keep track of like, oh, you guys are back. Last we left you, you were in this state, right? And you can just take it over from there. Mm-hmm. But also, I don't want to be looking at that same diorama every time I come in there. So you got to be able to like lift up this whole table and bring in a totally different one that takes place on a harbor somewhere with ships, and a ghost ship is just pulled into town or something. And so you're like having these like totally immersive, curated, high-end Dungeons and Dragons experience. Could be cool, because I know there's a lot of influencers too that like they live stream their D&D games, and it's just joking fun, and like people seem into it.
As somebody who has never played D&D but always wanted to, I would pay for that.
Yeah,
I'd wait for like my birthday. I'd get some friends, and I would pay for that.
So the people I know that are hardcore into D&D, they go like, "That's not what D&D's about," and I'm like, but that's what I wanted. I think maybe not at your level, but I think that would be fun. Yeah. And they're like, no, it's about, making up a story and being able to go off script and being able to go to places and do things that weren't, hard coded into this table that you've got in front of you. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I want the laser effects. I want the room to rumble when I cast a spell. Anyway,
that would be really cool. Anyway, I do have to end this. So, hey everybody, thank you so much for joining me. This is my friend John Root. Thank you so much for coming on to my podcast. Where can the people find you if they want to hire you for some interactive D&D?
I'm we old people, we use Facebook. So find me, John Root, on Facebook, and I'll be your friend.
All right, we'll see you next time. Bye.
All right, thank you. Bye.